And we are live. Welcome to all viewers. This is the sixth Alumni talk in a series of catch-ups very close to ThinkYoung's heart. If you've missed the previous talks, we are showcasing the achievements and stories of the alumni in our global ThinkYoung community. But importantly, our great alumni are also here to offer some words of wisdom from their experiences to help encourage young people to get themselves out there, pursue their career path and passion, and kickstart the future they want. We'll be picking their brains on lots of important topics, always keeping in mind how we can support and empower young people in every domain. So I'm your moderator, Betsy Lake, External Relations Assistant at ThinkYoung. And we're joined by Alumna, Gabriella Bossman, Product Delivery Advisor in the Cabinet Office for the UK Government. Thank you so much for joining me today. I can't wait to find out more, Gabriella.
Hello, everyone. Yeah, I'm really happy to be here. Thank you for the invite. I feel very honoured.
No, of course. Happy to have you. So I wanted to start with, so like I'm doing currently, you did a placement at ThinkYoung for the third year of your university degree at Aston University, and you're also involved in external relations and projects just like I am. So I'm really interested to hear more about your experience at ThinkYoung, and I can relate it to mine, 7 or so years later. So I'm interested, what kind of tasks were you doing and what sort of things did you enjoy about your time at ThinkYoung?
Great. Well, we're going straight into the deep end. So as you said, that was about 7 or so years ago. Time flies when you're having fun. So I did, as part of my sort of Erasmus year, I worked in ThinkYoung for a year, which was an incredible experience. I think I got the role something like a week before, and then packed my bags and then
Wow.
moved to Brussels, which was all very exciting and sort of fast paced. And I think that probably mirrored the actual experience in ThinkYoung. It was an incredibly dynamic organisation. There was always something going on, and my role, as you say, was much like yours, external relations, and I sort of took the side of partnering with student organisations, etc., so that we had a sort of a healthy base of young people to ask a series of questions on when we were doing any of our respective research. But much like any sort of startup world, you end up doing more than just your role. And so I also did a lot of facilitation and planning for what was the Entrepreneurship Summer School, which I'm so pleased to hear still exists. I had actually, my first day was attending the Entrepreneurship Summer School, and then on from there, planning it for sort of subsequent years in Brussels and also in Hong Kong at the time, because we were sort of building up our Asia outreach at that time too. So there was so many opportunities, both sort of organisationally, but then also very much connecting to the European institutions, which was absolutely fantastic. And the exposure was beyond what I could have imagined as a sort of a third year university student, speaking in European Parliament, meeting with various organisations, sort of pitching what we do, trying to get sponsorship, etc. So it was a really dynamic full year, and it definitely put me in good stead in terms of confidence, networking, that horrible word that is sort of so important for all of us in what we do. So very much a sort of the genesis of that type of work, which is sort of carried out throughout my career now, actually, which has been in public, private and third sectors respectively now.
Wow, so many more things of what you just said I want to pick up on later, but we'll come back to that. So yeah, I definitely agree. Dynamics, one of the top words that springs to mind when I think of my 9.5 months so far at ThinkYoung.
Yes.
So I hope that from your experience at ThinkYoung, did you take forward lots of important, lessons or skills, and did it maybe even change or influence what you then decided to go on to do afterwards?
It did in many respects. I mean, I think I just alluded to sort of networking. So I think each of the respective jobs that I've taken on since have very much been people facing. And I think that's sort of the clarity that I got on that was very much from my experience at ThinkYoung. It's working with people, supporting them to deliver whatever it is that they want to deliver, or even just making sure that I'm sort of constantly in touch with clients, etc. And so definitely that's a sort of a thread that has tied most of my experiences together in terms of sort of my career over the last couple of years, for sure. There's also something sort of really key around a cause. So after working in ThinkYoung and then graduating, I actually found myself in the private sector, and I worked there for a few years. and was successful there, sort of promoted there, etc. But quickly realized that I'm the sort of person that needs to work for a cause to feel energy, and to feel like I'm contributing to something greater. That's sort of a key sort of learning from my time at ThinkYoung. And I think if I hadn't worked at ThinkYoung, it probably would have taken me a little bit longer to identify that that's something that's really important for the work that I do. And not to say that in the private sector that's not possible. There are many private sectors that have great ethos, private sector organizations that have a great ethos, and there is a sort of a real positive intention behind it. But I think it was sort of, for me, it was very clear that after working in ThinkYoung and then moving to the private sector, that, oh wait, actually, I really need to make sure that whatever I do, there's a cause and something that I am energized by and excited by, in order to really do my best. And that's what sort of led me on from the private sector into working in the civil service in the Cabinet Office on the exciting Brexit, which I'm sure you're going to ask me about a little bit later in the conversation.
You know it's coming.
It's coming.
I definitely agree. I definitely agree. I think some people really need that motivation towards a cause they're passionate about in order to feel that satisfaction and feel productive and just get the most out of their job, as it makes up such a big proportion of our lives. So I completely, I think it's great that you found that thinking. Yes, your job sounds very interesting, very impactful. I know that you're working on the EU transition and Brexit and transformation and change programs. And I'd just like to know a little bit more about what that means and what that entails.
Sure. So as I mentioned, I joined the civil service just 3.5 years ago now. And I'd initially sort of joined in a sort of a consultant type role. I suppose it was, having been in the private sector, in the civil service, it's always sort of great to get fresh ideas from people from the outside, because it's quite easy to get sort of quickly assimilated into the civil service and how things work, but sort of fresh perspectives are always really welcome. So I did that first, and then I sort of moved on to a role which focused primarily on EU transition and a smooth EU exit into transition, which has been quite complex. I've been sort of specialising on things to do with the border activity, and how we improve our borders and I won't go into too much detail there, but it's really given me the opportunity to sort of again bring a fresh perspective. Not everyone that works on Brexit was a leaver or a remainer. It's really such a mix of people, which I think sort of provides a really balanced perspective. We know that we're in this situation, we have to leave, but how do we make the most of it? And how do we ensure that we are not systematically disadvantaging any respective groups, and that sort of project delivery and rigor is applied to the things that we do. So even if there is a ministerial announcement on said thing, how do we make sure that this thing does actually achieve the benefits that it seeks to achieve? I mean, it's sort of initiative. How do we make sure that these things are deliverable and they're going to be delivered on time? It was very much a sort of a fast-paced environment, in which one announcement led to another, and then impacted on what it is that was being delivered. So as opposed to doing the delivery myself, I actually advised various programs across government, within multiple departments, on how to sort of effectively deliver and ensure that they are achieving the benefits and how they're actually managing change in light of the really complex and constantly changing and ambiguous environment, if that makes sense. And so that has been really exciting work for the last couple of years. And yeah, as you say, it's been a lot of change and transformation programs. And as much as Brexit is done, there's still a little bit of a tail. And so I'm very much still in that world, in supporting programs, in delivering successfully to achieve the sort of the outcomes that we sort of desire for various programs that impact on our citizens. It's not perfect. I think anybody would put their hands up and say that's the case. But it's been great to be sort of on the sharp end of change in an area that was at one point across every newspaper, across every outlet, on the lips of every individual, whether you were sort of politically engaged or not, which I thought was incredibly exciting. So I have a background in politics and international relations. So politics is just I enjoy it and I'm interested in it. But that we definitely had a large part of the population that wasn't. But Brexit, in its very strange and almost conflictual way, allowed for people to engage in politics in a way that they perhaps wouldn't have in the past. And that's not just in terms of the referendum itself, but following on from the referendum, there was just so much discourse about how is this going to impact us? How can we make sure that we do this properly? Should we have another referendum, etc.? And it was really exciting to be part of something that really did invigorate almost the whole population at Singapore. And then COVID came, but that's probably another conversation, and that completely blew Brexit out of the water. But yeah, that's something else entirely.
Yeah, it sounds like a whirlwind, but a very stimulating, challenging, amazing whirlwind to be a part of.
Oh, definitely.
So yeah, I was actually going to mention, with obviously COVID coming in, Brexit, as you said, used to be all that you saw and heard and read everywhere, and then COVID came in, it completely distracted everyone or the public from Brexit. So did COVID affect your work a lot?
It definitely did, and it did for many reasons. So I mean, we've already just spoken to the whirlwind that it was. I think the whirlwind only grew in size by virtue of the fact that it was so much impacted by COVID. So some of the plans that you'd have, even just in terms of how you resource a specific initiative or program, had to be flipped on its head because, now we need to focus on this emergency situation. And so we're almost battling two demons at the same time. One, of course, COVID is life-threatening in many ways, but then in a sense, we're also trying to think of our future as a nation on the Brexit side of things. So the two things definitely came into play, but there was a lot of learning from it in terms of how to deliver in government in a more agile way. How to deliver at pace, because we had to, how to deliver more collaboratively. So whereas before some departments would work in their silos, both Brexit and COVID meant that, no, we've really got to come together to make sure that we're achieving value for money, that we have a coordinated approach, that we're not duplicating efforts, etc. So there was as much as they were obviously really difficult and trying situations and seasons, and in many senses still ongoing, there's been a lot of learning that I'm really hoping that in the UK government we can sort of take forward in terms of how we manage change, how we react to situations and contexts that are incredibly complex and sometimes confusing, and we don't have all of the variables, etc. But in a sense, there were things that were done right, and that we can learn from for future delivery. I didn't work on COVID myself, but my world was very much impacted by it. Half the people that I had built relationships with disappeared into the COVID world, and so it was quite sort of a complex challenge in the Brexit world. Almost became more complex, but yeah, really exciting and dynamic nonetheless. As you can see, I quite like dynamic and really intensive working environment. So maybe ThinkYoung is sort of giving me a buzz for that.
I was making that observation in my
head. I think so.
Yeah, it's nice to see that a positive came out of COVID with increased maybe collaboration and connection between departments and solidarity sort of thing. So that's really nice to hear. And I was also interested, I know it's a difficult question, especially in the time that we have, but best of your ability, from what you've seen, what are some of the really important ways, positive or negative, that Brexit may impact the young generation in the UK or elsewhere in Europe and their opportunities? Are there really good projects to compensate and make the most out of Brexit for the youth that are in the pipeline?
Yeah, so this is a real thing and probably something that I sort of became increasingly emotional over. I mean, so the very fact that I worked in ThinkYoung for a year was by virtue of the Erasmus scheme.
Exactly.
And that is nay more. However, the Turing scheme is being developed, and actually that will provide an opportunity not only for young people and students in the UK to find work placements or study, etc., in Europe, but also in other places across the world. So So there's definitely been a recognition that, okay, we've lost out for young people in this space, but how do we actually use the situation to make things better? So now the opportunity will be not just for young people to go to Europe, but then also to, if it's the US, Africa, etc., wherever there's a partnership of organizations or universities with one another. So I'm really hoping that that can be positive and change. But I think a really key thing to note is we are, and this is perhaps a bit more ephemeral, but Brexit has sort of signposted how important political engagement is. And we have a generation of people that are coming up that have been impacted by Brexit that weren't able to vote on it. And so I'm just speaking from the sort of the UK perspective here. And so we have, and this is what I sort of referenced before, an increasing sort of political energy by virtue of what has happened with Brexit. And I do think that we shouldn't allow that to falter. All those that didn't manage to vote, or the young people that have been impacted, this is a time now more than ever where it's really important to be more politically engaged. And I'm not just saying that as someone who's sort of passionate about this space, because as a civil servant, I'm meant to be neutral. So it's not that I'm sort of pushing forward for a specific agenda. It's more so get engaged and get involved, because there are going to be an increasing amount of decisions like this that will be made, not just in the UK, but I think across nations now. And probably Brexit was sort of the beginning of a much bigger spinning wheel of sort of monumental decisions that nations are making around how they work together or not. And these impact on our young people. So I think there is a real need for us to engage politically. And we're seeing this, for example, with net zero and the environmental agenda. We can't just sit sort of and watch our world just be destroyed. And political engagement doesn't necessarily mean you have to be in government, etc. Look at people like Greta Thunberg, etc. There is scope for young people to rise up and to say, hey, actually, this generation made this decision. However, as the future generation, or even, I don't even like to say the future, the now generation, there is a way for us to impact, or we should be impacting on the decisions that are going to be made, because they will be impacting us in the many years to come. So I don't know if that fully answered your question, but I'm really hoping that the wildness that Brexit was or is in many senses will be a sort of a driver or some sort of a propeller or impetus for people to be more politically and socially and societally engaged. And as I say, that doesn't necessarily mean I need to be the next MP, but that is really just tapping into the issues of a generation and actively engaging with those. And it doesn't necessarily mean that, again, that has to be your full-time job, but social engagement and community activism, etc., are just so important. And you'd be surprised how much they impact on the decisions that governments and leaders make. I mean, even just in being in the media, one article could mean a whole new program of hundreds of millions. And so there are so many ways for us now that we've seen that, wow, this thing has really sort of negatively impacted us in some ways. This is the time for us to rise up. We can't just sort of go along with the status quo. We've got to sort of push against that to ensure that we are impacting positively our communities, our family, I mean, at every level, and future generations too. Hopefully that wasn't too long-winded and that made sense.
I think you more than answered my question. You raised so many interesting, important points, and I couldn't agree more. I love this theme at the moment of this whole building back better, you know, with all the crises and demons that you've mentioned, you know, the environmental crisis, Brexit, COVID, you know, everything like this. There's this theme of, you know, it's dismantling a lot of systems that previously did not work for society. They've just been kept because of tradition. And, you know, stuck in rut sort of thing. And now COVID has shown, you know, the inefficiency, the opportunities to create much better systems that serve, rather than just a small group, like everyone, a lot better. So I think
you should take the interview. Forget me, I don't need to talk for the rest of it. You've just summed it up perfectly, Betsy. I can leave now. That's exactly it. You've said it all, yeah.
I think in that way, it's an exciting time, but it's also scary with all the unknowns. Totally. So I think it's reassuring to know that, there are programs and projects with young people and our futures in mind. And as you said, it's so important for us to recognise our important role in creating those futures, and being more active, because I was one of the ones that couldn't participate in the Brexit vote, but I will definitely be more involved now I can be in the future. So in these crazy times, I was wondering if you had any tips and recommendations for young people moving forward, to adapt and prepare for post-COVID, post-Brexit. Earlier you touched on the really important points of visibility and networking and self-promotion, despite some of the negative associations that these can have. And I was wondering if is this really important moving forward as well, and how can young people be comfortable doing this, more of this?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think just picking up on some of the things that I've probably already said and that you've just outlined there, like staying curious. And it sounds a bit, throw it on, what does that really mean? But really just curiosity, and it did not kill the cat. It's a really, I think it's such a key thing to any line of work actually, that you find yourself in sort of going forward. Okay, this is what currently exists. However, why? And then why again? And then why again? And then really just sort of building up a repository of an understanding of why things are the way they are and potentially how they can be improved. A lot of the time when you enter the workforce, you'll get this really cliche thing of, oh my gosh, you bring so much energy into the space, or so much enthusiasm. And at first I just roll my eyes like, I bring more than enthusiasm, etc. But actually, I'm acknowledging now that the fresh perspectives, etc., are so important, because to the point we've made earlier, things aren't working. And it's the same people thinking of solutions sometimes, and they're just not finding a way to sort of move the dial any further forward. And so there is something around our sort of young people staying curious, and staying enthusiastic and energized to move. And they feel like quite intangible things. But if there's one thing that I've really learned over the course of my career, is that you can have as much knowledge or specialist knowledge in X space as you want. However, if you don't have the soft skills, and you don't have the interpersonal skills, and you don't understand how to relay complex messages or to challenge areas in order to add value, you might as well forget it. Just write a thesis and let it sit on a dusty shelf, sort of thing. And so we shouldn't, and I would definitely encourage young people to not underestimate the importance of those softer skills, and those intangibles in what they're doing. I know there was a lot of work that we did actually when I was part of ThinkYoung around STEM. So, and how important it is to consider that. But not everyone is STEM minded. And even if you are, and it's not just to sort of split people into two, even if you are, it doesn't sort of eradicate the importance of those softer skills, because I can explain to you till I'm blue in the face this particular theory, which will probably change your life. However, if I'm not relaying it in a way that's approachable, understandable, and if I don't make you feel a certain way, or I don't tell a certain sort of story, you're probably not going to retain what it is that I say. So I would definitely say for young people, you will probably get that, oh, you bring energy or whatever. And you might, in the beginning, sort of be viewed as not a knowledge asset in a specific area. However, that does not need to take away from the value that you can add to that space, especially now. And I've been speaking to a lot of people in HR, and a good friend of mine who's works in that space. We are now working very much virtually. That's the reason why we can have this conversation, and we can share it with whoever it is that's watching. And virtually can be exhausting and tiring. And so having enthusiasm, having energy, etc., you have no idea the impact that could actually make in an organization. And these are the sorts of things that people are now looking at when they're recruiting, because it's not just that, oh, they've got all of the skills and they tick those boxes. How do they work with people? How do they support the people that are in their team? How do they bring energy, etc.? These are the sorts of questions that people are beginning to ask as we pivot into a new way of working. And so, just to hammer home the message that, yes, you can have specialist knowledge, etc., but there's so much power in soft skills. And hopefully I've been able to demonstrate that for speaking for 25 minutes, but still keeping you engaged as far as possible, because there is an energy in what we're discussing. Hopefully that answered part of your question.
No, that was absolutely great advice. I don't think that's emphasized enough at all. I think young people really need to value their voices and their perspectives and their energy, as you say. So yeah, no, honest, that was a great answer. And going back to also what you've mentioned previously, you must have, very valuable experience and voices to bring to your workplaces, considering, that you've had experiences in the public, private, and third sector, all with, project delivery and project management as a link. And I was just wondering if you could maybe do a brief comparison of some of these experiences and the pros and cons of working in these different sectors.
Yeah, no, more than happy to. I think I alluded to it earlier that I am sort of a cause-driven person, and I am not to say at all that certain sectors don't have causes associated with them, but for me, that's sort of very much been a driver or value driver for the things that I've done thus far. And so, if I'm sort of answering the question around things that I've recognized, I think actually, maybe a key point to note here is that careers are not necessarily linear. It's not always that I go from here and then I climb this ladder, etc. Sometimes, in some instances, you'll realize that you've climbed a ladder up the wrong wall. And I think I potentially recognize that and thus move to the civil service. But who knows? I may shift the ladder in the next couple of years or whatever it is. But just as an encouragement that it's not necessarily the job you find the moment you graduate, even before. Some people won't go to university, is the job for the rest of your life. And I don't think that there has to be that sort of pressure. And now that I've had experiences in all three sectors, it definitely gives me, there's insights as to how each of them operates that I bring into my work context. So perhaps the ability to absorb change or absorb ambiguity, etc., that is symptomatic of organizations in the third sector, because you've got to sort of respond to different things in your contexts, sort of pulling out that best practice into where I am now. And then also in terms of the private sector, there is a great level of efficiency, because the bottom line is what is most important. And so there is no room or scope for you to sort of just allow things to be you're always thinking about how to improve processes, etc. And so have definitely brought that into my current context. And so, yeah, I think that maybe the two things are that careers are not necessarily linear, but there are always things that we can pull from each of those respective contexts. And I've sensed into where I am now, and hopefully going forward into the future.
I think it's amazing now, the shift in how we're now encouraged to explore different options and not just, like in previous patterns, enter a career, first thing, stay in that for the rest of your life. You're allowed to make mistakes, see what you like, move around, explore options. And I think that's really, really valuable. So yeah, I agree with what you're talking about. And I was wondering as well, I think this is also an important subject to touch upon throughout your career journey as a Black woman. I was just wondering about the possible barriers you face and how you've overcome these and all these
of course.
sectors and opportunities.
Yeah, more than happy to speak to that. I mean, that could be a full day conversation in itself. So as you can see, I have a very neutral name, Gabriella Bossman. So I could have an email correspondence with you and you're not really sort of acknowledging. And then I meet you in person. It's like, oh, I'm looking for Gabriella Bossman. This is she. And so there are often instances where maybe like sort of slight microaggressions where it's like, oh, I wasn't expecting to see you. But I do think, and I don't want to sort of overstate the case, because I do think that I've been very fortunate. It's either I've been very fortunate, no, not to say fortunate, but blessed in the opportunities that I've been provided, and have not sort of put my race first, in the sense that I'm not doing this because I am Black or otherwise. I'm doing this because this is something that I'm energized by. I have sort of a motivation and inspiration for this particular thing. if you don't want me here, I'll find somewhere else that does. And if anything, sometimes I've actually found it as being my USP. So it's very much about almost turning what would be viewed as a negative on its head. Just like I spoke to earlier around you're young, inexperienced, yes, but I have energy and enthusiasm and potentially more of a commitment to this thing than people that have been here for donkey's years. It's the same thing that I sort of often find myself in. I sometimes call it the trifecta, which is that I'm young, black and female, and these are all the sort of the minorities that are probably in most instances sort of pushed to the side or ignored, etc. But however, now I'm aware that if I'm in a meeting context and I'm in a room full of basically 30 middle-aged white men, I stand out. And so I have potentially a louder or a more impactful voice by virtue of my difference. And so I almost sort of turn this view of barrier on its head to see it as something that is my USP. I mean, especially in Brussels, at the time I had a completely shaved head. And I was going to meetings with all sorts of corporations, speaking in a European Parliament, etc. And it was like, whoa, who is this? And then I often got comments of, you speak so eloquently. So well, okay, thanks very much. But now potentially I have sort of combated any sort of stereotype you have around people of color, etc., because I've managed to deliver, and probably even further than your expectations, irrespective of your perspective of me, if that makes sense. And so I mean, I could wax lyrical about this all day, but and I don't want to minimize the really challenging situations that people of color, young women and across the spectrum experience in terms of blockers, etc. However, I think I've sort of resolved in my mind to not ignore them, but to recognize them and almost use those as my, okay, if that's the blocker, then that's the thing I'm seeking at this moment to sort of overcome. And it's not just for myself, but it's for other people that are watching. And even I'm not particularly a public person. I don't really post online, etc. However, I'm now becoming so much more aware that as I do, it's not just for me to sort of pump my chest and for people to recognize how lovely and wonderful I am, but it's an inspiration for a next generation of people that might recognize or see themselves in me in some sort of way, whether that be because of my age, my gender, my ethnicity, whatever it is. And so there's definitely sort of a power in demonstration and living out these things. Role modeling. I told you should do the interview for me. Role modeling these things so that we can, and being sort of lifting, being a conscious hand up, be that through mentoring, again, sort of being a part of any sort of social community action as well. There's just so many ways in which we can sort of address the issues that we see, but then also choose to say, this will not be the thing that stops me. And I think I've probably, as far as possible, tried to do that and just seen myself as a USP. You've never worked with a young black woman before? Well, today's your lucky day, and she's going to change your life.
Thanks so much for sharing that, Gabriella. That was really amazing to listen to. We could talk about all of the mentoring and things you're involved around this, but unfortunately we're already run out of time. Time definitely flies, as you said earlier, when you're having fun. So we usually end on 2 really quick fire questions, so do your best if you can to do this in 1 sentence or 2. So the first one we ask is, if you're the president of the European Commission for 1 day, what would you do and why?
Okay, the first one is, and this has been ingrained in me from my time at ThinkYoung, is to think young, and is to engage with young people in all the decisions that are being made, because not being morbid, but there is a very high chance the people that you're engaging with are likely to kick the bucket very soon, and it won't be impacting them. And so it is to engage with young people, I would definitely say. So that would be a big thing. I'd be looking at all of the respective initiatives and the policy agendas and intentions, and just make sure, have we got a diversity of perspectives here? And I say young people, but I also say I mean, if we're talking diversity and inclusion, as far across the spectrum as possible to inform whatever it is that we're doing, to make sure that this decision is representative, or this initiative, this program, etc., is representative of what we are, which is very diverse populations. Hopefully that answers the question.
No, that's perfect. Thanks for that. I think it's a great step now that we have that youth coordinator appointed.
Yes.
Yeah. So completely
I won't
suits
go
the current times.
Totally. We'll leave there. Long overdue.
And the last question is, what is the one thing you wish you'd known or wish you could tell your younger self?
I would, and I still think about this now, it's okay to not have it all together. It's okay to, at this point, just be led by what you're curious about, and just sort of go with that. And in time, and through experience, you will be able to sort of hopefully ascertain what it is that you have. But again, things are not linear. So I tell myself, Gabriella, it's okay to not have it all together and not to be the CEO of a FTSE 250 company by the time I'm 25. It's okay to just be exploring and figuring it out. We've got many years of working life ahead of us. So pursue what is interesting to you, rather than what you think is the right sort of thing to do at this particular point or life stage. So that I would say that.
That's great. I think that would reassure a lot of young people out there who think that they need to have it all figured out straight away. I really wish we had longer. There's so many more questions I could talk to you about, and clearly the audience agrees. I have comments from Andrea, the founder, and from other people saying, fantastic, and wish we could listen to more. So thanks so much for joining me and for sharing a really valuable advice and experience a lot.
Thank you. It's been so much fun, and we might have to interview you next time because it seemed like you had all the golden nuggets rather than me.
Thank you. And thanks to all those watching, and don't forget to tune in for our next alumni talk. So have a great evening, everyone.